Hello everyone, my name is Akshita, and this is the first video in many to come in our FTC CAD series. So I'm the current build head in FTC Team 542 WHS Robotics, and I'm going to be posting many videos like this to teach you how to use SOLIDWORKS. So let's get started. When you first open SOLIDWORKS, you should see this menu over here with this screen, which is called the home menu. And if you don't, that's totally fine. You can just go up to the top tab here and click the house button to pull up this menu. So when you see this menu, there's multiple different things you can click, but the main things you should be looking at are these three options over here: part, assembly, and drawing. For now, don't even worry about the drawing option. We're just going to be looking at part and assembly. So a part is when you create one 3D object, and an assembly is when you put multiple 3D objects together. In this video, we're going to be focusing on part. And another thing that you can look at over here is the recent documents tab, and it just shows you all the recent documents you've been working on. And if you want to see more, you can go to the view all button and you can scroll through everything that you've been working on. So now let's get into actually making a part. And to start off, you're just going to click the part button, and it might take a little bit, but you should eventually load into this screen. And when you see this screen, you're going to see multiple different things. Don't get overwhelmed, because I'm going to explain them all to you. So to start off, in the top area, we have this thing called the Command Manager, and this is where you're going to see all the different tools you have, all the different features, and we'll get into what exactly that is in a little bit. But within that area, you should also have these other tabs that you can go through that give you all these different features and tools that you can use. And on the left side over here, you have this thing called a Properties Manager. And similar to the Command Manager, you have all these different tabs you can go through. And this white space over here is our graphics area. It's where you're going to see your sketches, your 3D objects, all of that stuff. And when you're looking in this area, you also have this thing over here that shows you all the axes. It's called the triad because it shows you 3 different axes. But that's helpful because it lets you know from what perspective you are looking at your sketch or your object or your project in general. And if you press down your scroll wheel and you drag your mouse around, you can rotate, and you can tell that you're rotating because the triad over here is moving around in whichever direction you're rotating. And the last thing you should know about sort of navigation in this entire thing is the Units tab, and you can see that in the bottom right hand corner over here. So when you opened SOLIDWORKS for the first time, it probably asked you to set your units, and if you set it to something but you want to change it now, you can do that. You can either do that for your entire SOLIDWORKS. You can go up here, you can click the gear looking icon. It's basically your settings button, and if it loads, you will get an option like this. You can just search up units here, and you can go to this option, and you can set it to whatever you want, and this will change every single units for every single document that you open. And you can see, you know that because it says systems options, so it's changing the units for your entire system. But the settings like tab kind of lets you change all different settings for your systems options or for your document options. So this would change it for this specific document. So you can, for example, change it from dark mode to light mode. I don't know why anyone would ever do that, but you can, and you can explore all the different options that are over here. So when you start off in SOLIDWORKS, basically how you should think of things is starting with something 2D and then making it into a 3D object. So we're going to start off with things like lines and curves and make them into polygons and shapes, and then make those shapes into things that are 3D objects. So think of starting off with lines and then making a square and then making a cube. When you want to make a 2D object, you want to make this thing called a sketch, basically drawing out your shape or polygon or whatever. And whenever you start by making a sketch, you have to choose the plane that you're working with. Whenever we start, you can use any plane you want, but it is recommended to use the top plane because it makes the most sense. And that's because the top plane is basically like the ground, and it's like having like a top-down view on whatever you're CADing. It's like the easiest one to visualize. So whenever you want to start a sketch, there's multiple different ways to do it. You can click on the plane that you want, and then you'll get this pop-up over here that'll give you these options, and one of those options is sketch. And one thing about SOLIDWORKS is whenever you hover over something, there'll be another window that pops up that tells you about what that something is. So for example, if I go up to this menu over here and I hover over line, it'll give me a short dialogue about how to make a line or like what it is. So once I've entered my plane, you can see this red sort of arrow thing over here, and this is the origin. And knowing what the origin is really important, because if you don't know what it is, then it's going to be hard to define your sketches, and we'll talk about what defining your sketches means in a little bit. But for now, I just want to go over all of the tools for sketches in this menu over here. So one of the most common tools we use is the line tool, and it's basically just making lines in whichever angle you want, however long you want. And one cool thing about SOLIDWORKS is when you're making a line or you're making a circle, you can see that little white box pop up that'll tell you around how long you're making it. So if I make it longer, it'll increase. Right now it's 156, and if I make it shorter, it'll decrease. Right now it's 42. And that's in general just nice for visualization. When you're drawing around in SOLIDWORKS, you left click to place something or end a point, and you right click to get some of its properties. And when you want to exit a tool, you can either right click and select, or you can just click escape and you'll exit out from that tool. And if you want to return to the previous tool that you used, you just press enter and it brings back that tool. And if you want to delete something, you can either right click it and press delete, or you can left click it and press delete on your keyboard. So there's multiple different ways to do things, and if you want to delete multiple things at once, you can just highlight over it like you would text, right click, and then click delete or use your keyboard. And all of these tools over here are things that make up one sketch, and we call those entities. So entities make up a sketch, and a sketch makes up a 3D object, and 3D objects make up assemblies. But after the line tool, you have your circle tool. Usually we just use the one that starts off with the center point. So you can click wherever you want for the center point to be and make the radius as big as you want. And then we have the spline tool. This one we don't use as much, but it does exist, and it lets you make curves however you want. And then you have the rectangle tool. You can either have a corner rectangle or you can have a center rectangle. Those two are the most used. And there's also the arc tool, which is also super duper used, and these various different types of arcs that'll let you choose midpoints and how big you want your arc to be and its radius. There's an ellipse tool, similar to the circle tool, but it does make you choose 3 different points, or 2 different points, similar to the circle tool. And then you have other things like slots and polygons. So those are the basics of sketch tools, but in terms of sort of moving around, there's a bunch of different things you can do. So like I mentioned before, you can hold down your scroll wheel and rotate, and you can see how that rotates around one axis. And if you look at the bottom left corner, you can see that I'm rotating around the z-axis right now. And if I move over here, I would be rotating around the x-axis. Another tool is if you're super zoomed out from your sketch or whatever, you can press F and it'll take you directly back to a normal view. And if you're in like a super random view and you want to go back to a specific angle, then you can press your spacebar and it'll give you this sort of cube, and you can rotate around the cube and you can click the specific view that you want. So if I want to see my sketch directly like this, I would click that view. Or if I wanted to see it from like this weird angle, I would click this view. And then if you want to move things around, you can either highlight them and move them around with your mouse, or you can highlight them and move them around with your arrow keys to rotate. And if you want to move side to side with your arrow keys, you just hold on Control and you can move side to side, up and down. and the zooming in and out is based on where your cursor is. So if I put my cursor here, I can zoom in and out to that specific area. If I put my cursor all the way down here into this hexagon, I can zoom in specifically into that hexagon. So just keep that in mind. When we're CADing in FTC, we want to do this thing called defining our sketches. And in SOLIDWORKS, you can have undefined sketches. It's not going to give you like an error message or anything. But when you're CADing for something like an FTC part, you want to define your sketches so everything is accurate and has the correct measurements. So when something is undefined, it means that it's kind of just there. It doesn't have any specific measurements or relations or properties assigned to it. So for example, this sketch would be undefined. And you can tell whether or not a sketch is undefined by the color it has. So you can have parts of your sketch that are defined or parts of your sketch that are undefined. So right now, you can see that this sketch is partly defined and partly undefined. You know that it's undefined if it's blue, and you know that it's, or underdefined, sorry, not undefined. You know that it's underdefined if it's blue, and you know that it's fully defined if it's black. And you'll know whether or not your entire sketch has any underdefined parts by looking down here in this menu, and it'll either say underdefined or fully defined. So there's multiple different ways to check whether or not you still need to define things. So another way you can tell, which I think is a good way to tell when you know that your sketch is underdefined but you don't know where it's underdefined or what parts you need to define, is you can simply click any part of the underdefined area, so like the blue ones, and you can drag it around. And if you're able to move any part of it, then you know that it's underdefined. So right now, this sketch is underdefined because the length of this blue line can be pretty much anything. And the length of this black line can be pretty much anything. And the angle of this line to the black line isn't defined either. And the way that you define things is by using this thing up here called Smart Dimension. So when you click Smart Dimension, you can start by defining whatever you want. So if I want to define the length of this line, I can click from this point to this point, and I can either define the length of the line this way, or this way, or this way. For now, I'm going to choose this way. And then you'll have another dialog pop up that shows you the measurement. This shows you the current length or current whatever measurement of the line. And even if you've set your units to millimeters, so like for example, if I change this, it'll automatically be 11 millimeters. You can always go in and say something like 11 inches, and it'll define it to be in inches instead of millimeters. And it'll give you that amount in millimeters when you view the measurement. So now that we've defined this part, it's still underdefined because we can move around the angle. So let's define the angle. And you can define angles by clicking from line to line, and it tells you you can define the angle. I'm just going to set this to 100. And it's still underdefined. That's because we haven't defined the length of the bottom black line. So there we go. And now our entire sketch is fully defined because of three reasons. We don't see, first reason is because we don't see any blue. Second reason is because I can't move any of this around like I did before. And third reason is because it says fully defined in the bottom corner over here. So if you guys weren't already sort of following along, I want you to pause the video right now and do something similar to this, where you define two lines together using three smart dimensions. So smart dimensioning is not the only way to define things in SOLIDWORKS. There's also this thing called sketch relations. And sketch relations are really helpful when you don't want a bunch of random smart dimensions in your sketch. And as you guys CAD more and more and you have more and more sketches and definitions, you'll start to understand why things get really slow or annoying when you have so many smart dimensions. So let me make a line over here, and let's just make this kind of random like that. So right now you can see that this line over here is underdefined because it's blue and I can move it around, but this one is defined because it's black and I can't move it around. So imagine I want this line to be parallel to this line. If I wanted to use smart dimensions to do that, it would be kind of annoying. But I can go into sketch relations and do it very easily. And the way you go into sketch relations is you hold shift, and so right now I'm holding shift, and you left click on something and you can see the sketch relation for that one line pops up. But then if I wanted to do a sketch relation between two things or two entities, I would keep shift held and I would also left click another entity. And you can see here that it shows both of these lines, line 1 and line 2. And I have this relation menu over here. So since this bottom line is fully defined, when you click a relation, that relation is going to be applied to this line corresponding to the defined line. And you'll see what I mean. So if I click parallel, for example, this line becomes parallel to this line. Let's say I go back and I click perpendicular. You can see that this line has become perpendicular to this line. And I can't like move it around. So right now if I try to right click and rotate it, it doesn't work because we set the relation to be perpendicular. So it's going to be perpendicular forever. But if we wanted to change that, so say it's set to perpendicular, we can just click this, and you don't have to click both of them to change the relation. You just have to click one of them, and you can just right click and delete all the relations or just one relation. And now you can see that, now you can see that I can move this line around and it's not perpendicular anymore. So just to show off some of the other sketch relations, I'm going to go back to the menu. We have horizontal, vertical, collinear, perpendicular, parallel, and equal. I think one of the most used sketch relations, especially when you're dealing with circles or something like that, is the equal relation. And that sets the length of this to the exact same length of this, or whichever measurement you have. So now I can't make this longer or shorter anymore because it's 100. And you can check that by just using Smart Dimension and going here. It shows 100 automatically. And since we use a sketch relation equal, if you try to define it again using 100, it gives you an error message. And you would think that error messages only exist in programming, but nope, they also exist in CAD. And the reason it doesn't want you to define this as 100 is because it already knows that it's 100 since you set it equal to this one. And another sketch relation that I really like to use is this thing called collinear, and that makes the underdefined entity like go onto the same line as the defined identity. So yeah, collinear. And finally, there's a sketch relation called coincident, and what that does is if you select 2 points, you can make those points connect by giving them both a coincident relation. And you don't have to do sketch relations to the same two entities. You can do point to line, you can do whatever you want to whatever you want. It's kind of just experimenting and understanding when you need to use what relations. So now we're going to go into how to use actual features. And the first thing I'm going to do is delete all of this because I don't need any of this anymore. And you can either, and I'm just going to highlight and delete all of that. And I'm still in my sketch. And at this point, if you haven't really been following along, I want you to start following along. We're just going to make something simple. It's just going to be a cube, but it's going to help you better understand how features work. So we know that we need multiple lines. We all know what a cube starts off with. It starts off with a square, and we can either do that by starting off with the rectangle or starting off with just lines. I'm going to start off with just lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a square. Very simple, just like that. And instead of smart dimensioning every single side and having 4 different dimensions, I'm going to use sketch relations to set all of these sides equal to each other because we know that all of the sides in the square are the same length. And then all I have to do is smart dimension one side. So let's say I want it to be 100. And there we go. Our sketch is fully defined. And now we can exit our sketch, and you can exit your sketch by either pressing the exit button up here or the X button up over there. Doesn't really matter. You can click whichever one you want. And now you can see that your sketch is gray because you're not in it anymore. And you can go back into your sketch by left clicking your sketch here in the Properties Manager and clicking Edit Sketch. And now we're going to learn about the Boss Extrude feature. So whenever you want to use a feature, you can do it in two ways. You can click your sketch and then click the feature that you can click from the Command Manager, and it'll open up the feature menu. Or you can click the feature, you can click the feature and then go to this drop down over here, which shows you your feature tree, and you can click your sketch. Either way works. And then you'll see this Boss Extrude menu pop up. So when you're doing a Boss Extrude, there's multiple different things you can do. The most commonly used are blind, up to surface, up to vertex, and midplane. So blind is setting it to a certain measurement. So if we wanted to have a cube, obviously we would set it to 100, so that all side lengths are the same. But you can set it to whatever you want, and you can do the same thing with millimeters or inches. So I can do 11 inches if I wanted, but we're going to keep it at 100 millimeters. And you can also use this arrow here to drag it to whichever measurement you want. And if you don't want to use blind, there's this other thing called midplane that lets you extrude from the middle of your sketch plane instead of the end of your sketch plane. So you can see here that it extrudes in both directions, and if you use the arrow, it changes the extrusion in both directions. But if you went to blind, you can see that it starts from the bottom of the sketch. So it depends, you can do it however you want. But once you're all done with your feature, you can click the check mark button, and there you go, you have made a cube. So now let's talk about the cut extrude feature. So say I wanted to make a hole in this cube on this face. So a hole starting here and going all the way to this face, so through the entire cube. I can do it in two ways. I can either start on the front plane and make my sketch, or I can click on any face of the cube and treat it as a plane, and just after I have that face selected, I can click the sketch button and it'll give me an option to do a sketch here. And that's really useful for when you want to do specific cuts or specific features on specific faces of a 3D object that you already made. So now that I'm here, I'm going to choose the circle tool, and I'm just gonna make a circle in the middle like that. And we know right now that it's not defined because I can still move it around, and I can also change how big the circle is. I'm going to start off by using sketch relations to make sure that my circle is in the middle of my square. So first, if I want to use sketch relations, I'm going to hover over this line until I see that yellow dot pop up. I'm going to select that. I'm going to select the center point of my circle, and then I'm going to say vertical, so that those 2 points are vertical to each other. And then I'm going to do the same for this side. I'm going to select the midpoint of the line, the center point of the circle, and make them horizontal. And now you can see that dot is black, so it's fully defined, and now I just have to define how big my circle is. So I'm just going to use Smart Dimension, and I'm going to set that diameter to be 40. Now we have our circle. We're going to exit our sketch, and in the same way that we use the Boss Extrude feature, we're going to click our sketch, go to our Features tab, click our Extruded Cut feature, and this time it's going to make us select a region of the sketch that we want to cut, because we can either cut this region and leave just like a cylinder shape, or we can cut the cylinder shape and leave the rest of the cube. So in the same way that we did our extrude, we can also choose different ways to do our cut. So if I wanted to set it to a certain distance, if I wanted it to go all the way or only a little bit, I can use blind. There's this other thing called through all that automatically sets the cut to go entirely through one direction. Through all both makes the cut go through entirely in both directions. And then we have up to surface, which is also pretty common, and it lets you select a surface that you want to make the cut go up until. So if I wanted to make it all the way up until this surface, I would just select that surface. And another thing that's really common to use in features is where exactly your feature starts from. So say I wanted to start my feature 10 millimeters above the sketch plane. So right now I'm starting from the sketch plane, which is where the sketch is, and then cutting. So imagine I wanted to start 10 millimeters in away from my sketch. I would go to the from area over here and change from sketch plane to offset, and I can select how many millimeters away I want to be. So now you can see that instead of starting all the way from here, it's starting a little further down, and you can see that visually because you don't see a cut on this side, because when you highlight that, the cut's inside the cube. And say I wanted it to go all the way up to this surface, I can definitely do that. And you can see that the cut isn't through both. It starts 10 millimeters in this direction and goes all the way through. But I'm going to set it to be through all in both directions so that I have a cut going through my entire cube. So now that we've gotten the extruded boss base and cut options done, we're going to go into something a little bit more complicated called Revolve Cut and Revolve Extrude. And in FTC, we don't really use Revolve Extrude Cut, but it's good to know because it's like a basic feature. So we're going to start off by just deleting everything that we have so far, or you can open a new part file, it's up to you. I'm just going to delete all of that. And we're going to start a brand new sketch. Oops, I did it on the front plane on accident. A brand new sketch. So what I'm going to start off by doing is creating a line like that. And I'm going to create, let's see, I'm going to create a rectangle over here. And I'm not going to use any definitions on this one because I just want to show you guys how the tool works. But I'm going to exit my sketch and click the feature that I want. So Revolve is basically doing an extrusion but around a line. So you can see here, I didn't have to select anything besides the axis of revolution, but it did it for me automatically. And you can see that, let's go back into the feature. You can see that this rectangle got revolved around this axis of revolution. So you might think that the only way to make a cylinder is by extruding a circle, but actually you can do it by revolving a rectangle. And you can see how this might be useful for creating some parts. So for example, if you wanted to model a donut, you would just go here. You can delete all of these. You can just make a circle, but you can make a donut just by doing that. So there's a bunch of different cool things you can do with Revolve, but you can see here that the circle I made just gets revolved around that axis. That's how you use the Revolve tool. And it's the exact same idea for the Revolve Cut tool. So say for example, I go here and I make sort of a V shape. I exit, make a Revolve Cut. I would go here, click my feature. I would select that region that I wanted. Axis of revolution would be the same line, and then I can do a Revolve Cut. And one interesting thing you might have noticed is in my features, I can select which sketch regions I want. So if I wanted to only do one feature, but still get that V shape cut out of it, I would select only this region. So you can select both regions or just one region. And when you're CADing in FTC, you want to use as little features as possible because the more features you use, the harder it is to change one thing and not have it affect multiple things. So if you can do something like this, you should, because it makes your life a lot easier 99% of the time. But once you have a part and you think you're pretty satisfied with how it looks, you can save it and you can name it. So you should be saving your part every 10-15 minutes, but when you click save, it should give you this dialog that opens up into your file explorer, and you can choose wherever you want to save it, similar to how you would save like a PDF or an image. But you can save it, you can rename it. I'm just going to call this donut, and you can save just like that. And you'll know that it's saved when there's no star over here anymore. So let me show you another example. So right now, if I go here and do something random like make a line and exit, and I go here and hover over the SolidWorks icon, you can see that there's a star next to this one because I haven't saved it, and I have still made changes but I haven't saved those changes, but there's no star next to this one because I've already saved all the changes that I made. So I'm just going to close this one, and I'm going to click don't save because I don't need to save that one, but that's how you save a part in SolidWorks. Last but not least, I'm going to teach you guys how to use CAD drawings. Or not really how to use them, but how to understand them. So what you need to know when you use CAD drawings is there's two main things that you want to look at: the 3D view and the 2D views. The 2D views have all of these different measurements. You most likely will not be using every single measurement in your CAD, especially if you use sketch relations, but they're there. You can use whichever ones you want. You don't have to use whichever ones you don't want to use. But yeah, all of your CAD practice parts will be from something like this.